What's happening, everybody? Josh here from Spawn Fly Fish, and today we are talking jetty fishing. Highly anticipated, probably the most frequently asked question we get is how, when, where, what, why, jetty fishing. Everything you can ask, we've gotten asked. And in this video, we're going to try to go through everything that you need to be fully prepared for a day of success on the jetty. So first things first, we're going to talk about pre-trip, and this is a real thing. So the jetty is an interesting place, and there are several steps you need to take to make sure that you're prepared to fish the jetty. So we're going to start from our feet and work our way up and run through all the gear that you need. First things first, we're going to talk about footwear. You might have seen me out there running around on Chacos. Don't recommend it. You will scratch your feet up. You will jack up one of your toes. The best solution to that is a pair of these Sims boots that we have right here. Extra Tough and Grundon both make comparable models, but we would recommend some sort of boot out there for your feet. I think that's a big importance. You will get down near the water, so at some point it might get some water in it. Simply slide these off, drain them, slip them back on. Not a big deal if your feet get wet, and you'll be ready to rock and roll. As you work up, pants are preferable when it's warm in the summer. Shorts are just great, but moving up, then you start to talk about your gear, and it is necessary to have a pack out there. Organization is vital to your success on the jetty, and having everything in a waterproof pack, we got ones from Sims and from Fish Pond, is going to be pretty vital. You want to keep all your stuff clean. You want to keep it all in one spot. You don't want things to be rolling around on the rocks, and you definitely need something with a zipper, and we'll talk about that as we get into this. Next things next, we're going to talk about the tools you're going to use to catch these fish. So a common question that we get asked is what weight rod? And you can't, the reality of it is you can do it with a bunch of them, but we recommend 8 weight or higher. So an 8 or 9 weight. When you start climbing at 10 weight, can be a bit overkill, but you can do it. And when you start talking about 7 weight, definitely can do it, but you do run a little bit of a risk factor. And we're going to talk about that risk factor when we get into the actual catching of these species. As far as reels go, 8-weight reel, pretty standard. You don't need anything crazy. Most of this fishery is you're going to be stripping the line in while pulling the fish. If it does get out to your reel, simply just reel it up. It's not going to be a fishery that you're going to go into your backing unless you're going to be targeting salmon off the jetty. In that case, a good reel is going to make a difference. As far as fly lines go, this is probably the number 2 question, rod and then fly line. So modern fly lines, there's a million options, and this is really intimidating for a ton of people. And the reality to the question is that multiple fly lines will work. Actually, a ton of them will work, but we've narrowed it down to smooth out that learning curve for you. So floating line, no. We don't recommend it. Full sinking line, we also don't recommend it. And when we say full sinking line, you got to think about the jetty as a cliff. And you're standing on the edge of the cliff, and if that sink rate is going to all drop the same way, when you're retrieving the fly line, you're going to be dragging it across that cliff. And this cliff is covered in barnacles. So what you want to do is there to be a bit of a bow. And that bow is found in integrated sinking lines like a Scientific Angler's triple density, where it's a 753 or a 5.3 intermediate. Outbound Short also does the same thing, and Outbound Short's just an easy transition for us that live in the Northwest that use this style line for other fisheries. So that's one that we've also used a lot off the jetty. Sink tips will work as well, as long as there's some good weight to them. So keep that in mind. if you're talking about an intermediate line, we also would suggest you go a different direction. If you want to go out there for the first time, you don't want to buy all this gear, talk about lengthening the leader. And that brings us to our next gear is we're using Maxima 20 pound clear. Ultra Green Clear also works. You don't need to use fluorocarbon off the Jetty. It's expensive, and these will take some wear and tear to them. So if you're utilizing one of these sinking lines that we recommend, whether it be the 5.3 intermediate or 7.53, or I think there's a 7.5 intermediate, whether you're using one of those, you can shorten your leader up a little bit. I still recommend that you fish a leader that's longer than 7 feet. And why that is because you will lose flies and your leader will get stuck in the rocks. It will happen. If you're fishing this correctly, you're going to lose flies and your line's going to get caught. And you do not want your fly line to get caught. So that's kind of why we want that bowed fly line, where when you're pulling it out, you're pulling it more up than in. And that becomes really important. So you do add a little extra length so that if you do have to break it off, you're not breaking off your fly line. You don't want to lose a fly line. I have lost fly lines on the Jetty. I've lost parts of fly lines. I've lost sink tips. So we're here to smooth out and, like I said earlier, ease that learning curve for you today. Next thing's next. If you do spend the money on a fly line, you're going to want to keep it safe. The way to do that, and this is a must, whether or not you spend the money on a fly line, you need to have a stripping basket on the Jetty. If you think about it, when the swell is coming in towards you, there's going to be a time where you're stripping this line in, and it's going to go at your feet, and a little wave, all it does is catch that fly line and tucks it into that rock behind you or in front of you. And once that's tucked in there, it weasels its way down into the rocks and crevices, and it gets stuck on the barnacles. And again, it's very challenging to get off. And then next thing you know, you're having to set your rod down on the Jetty. You're bending down in not a great situation, generally speaking, unless the weather is perfect. So just avoid that. Get a stripping basket. You'll utilize this for far more than just the Jetty. If you don't have one, the Arex Flexi Stripper is my personal favorite, and it is a must-have on the Jetty. So then it brings us to flies. So we use Plan D fly boxes. There's a million other fly boxes you can use. So load up your fly box with a bunch of flies. We will link the Jetty fly that we like to use. It's just a football bead on a jig-oriented hook. And we'll link that in the About section below. And you should definitely check out that video. Tie up a bunch of them. And I mean a bunch, because you will lose them. So, and if you don't want that pattern, make sure that you're tying these on jig-oriented flies where that hook point is going to ride up. Tie them in a couple different colors. When you're fishing for salmon, obviously the fly changes, but we will also dive into that here in a second. That brings us to it right now, actually. It was literally a second. So, primary target species out there. So, rockfish, lingcod, cabezon, greenling, coho, chinook, all species that I've caught off the Jetty. I've also caught a couple perch, not really viable Jetty species in my opinion. You'll rarely catch cabezon, you'll rarely catch lingcod in my experience, and I've spent an absorbent amount of time out there. We live in Oahu. The North Jetty's right there. We can be fishing in it within 5 minutes from the shop, so I've got to spend a lot of time there. The two most common will definitely be the black rockfish and then coho when it comes to time. So for the black rockfish, we're using shrimp flies and jig-oriented shrimp flies. So that's really important to think about. And you can use, when we talk about these species, you can use these same fly lines for these varied species. So you don't need to get a fly line for rockfish or a fly line for coho, but as soon as the fishing changes or the tide changes, you'll change your retrieve for the two species. So for the rockfish with these sinking lines or the sink tip line that you have, you're searching or probing for the bottom. You're trying to get your fly near or around the bottom. As you see in some of the times where I've gone live on maybe Instagram, you see me kind of just following the current, reaching up, trying to feel for it. And once I feel for it, then I'm going to start that slow retrieve. Whereas for coho, short back, long forward, launching that out there. As soon as that fly hits the water, I'll maybe let it sink for a second, and then I'm really retrieving that. And for those flies, we want stinger style hooks. You can use your bait fish. We use a lot of Dalai Lamas. They do tend to get a little bit heavy to cast, but anything with a stinger style fly. A lot of the same flies that you use for sea run cutthroat, just beef them up a bit. So that's our whole pre-setup. Now you have a little bit of idea of the target species that you're going to go after and the gear you need. So now we are going to the jetty. So think about this, you went through all of this, you're ready to rock and roll, and now you're heading out to the jetty. So there's a couple things to keep in mind once you get there. The number one thing I would say to you is that you need to rig all of your gear in the parking lot. This isn't one of those fisheries where you take your fly rod down to the stream, you're looking at what's hatching. Not this one. Put all your gear together at the car. Why you do that is because I learned the hard way. The waves are coming, the rocks are coming, you're putting your gear together in an area where there's these crevasses that we mentioned earlier that steal your fly line. They'll also steal the tip of your fly rod. They'll also steal a reel. They'll steal anything that you don't have securely put together. No matter how good you think your dexterity is, you will inevitably drop something. So we want to make sure you put all your gear together, especially if you just loaded up for this, or especially if you're using a really nice rod or reel. Make sure that you take care of it and make sure that you put it together before you walk out onto the rocks. As you're preparing for one of these trips, the other thing to keep in mind is that you need to look forward to what's going on. And when I say that, I mean the swell, the tide, and the wind. Those three things are very important when you're fishing the jetty. If you drive out to one of our jetties here in Washington State and you didn't look at the weather prior, there's a decent chance it's not going to be nice out there. And it's important that you do check those. So you're looking for really calm swell, you're looking for calm winds, and when you're lining up your trip, make sure that you're lining it up with some sort of slack tide. It's easiest to fish, it's the most productive, whether it's low slack or high slack. I personally like to fish low slack, but that's because I'm able to crawl down the rocks and get closer to the water. High slack, you don't have to crawl down as many rocks. So keep that in mind when you're preparing this trip. All right, back to the parking lot. You got all your gear rigged up, you checked all of the necessary things that I just went over, and you're gonna head out onto the rocks. So when you're crawling up the rocks, one thing to keep in mind is you do have proper footwear at this point, hopefully. If you don't, you will survive, but be very cautious. There are rocks that have a green slick to them. Pass on the grass is what we say. Do not step on the green rocks. Green rocks are very slippery. No matter what shoe you got on, they're very slippery. Do not wear your wading boots out there. Do not wear your waders. I don't recommend that here in Washington. I know there's certain places where people do that. I don't think that's necessary here. I think you want to really grip the rocks, and I think you want to feel where you're stepping. So be mindful of that. Pass on those green rocks. The barnacles, usually you can grip onto very well. So if you're stepping on a rock that has barnacles, your feet and your traction generally is going to be pretty good. Any rock that's wet, be very mindful of as well. Alrighty, so we're getting there. We are getting ready to cast out for the first time. We will look down here at the list. Cheat sheet here for me to make sure I talk about everything. And I forgot one thing. This is also very important. We mentioned it earlier, zippers. Whether it's your coat that you're wearing, your pants that you're wearing, do not put your keys or your phone or anything that you need to either get to the jetty or leave the jetty with that's vital in a loose pocket. You're gonna move around on the rocks. Again, this is an area where you drop something, it's gone. Generally speaking, if you drop something on a jetty, it's not gonna land somewhere where you can easily retrieve it. So we cannot stress that enough. Be organized. zip it in your backpack, zip your phone in your backpack, put your camera in your backpack. Anything that you have that's important, definitely put your keys in your backpack. Anything that you, and don't put it in an area where you're gonna set it in there and you're gonna pull your jacket out and it's gonna fall out. Zip it in some of these pockets. They have inner pockets, be sure to put it in there. So there we go. Now we're to the time where you're actually going to make that first cast. And this is obviously, you went through all of this. You've listened to me ramble on for several minutes now. Now you're ready to make that leap into the water, per se, with your fly, not you personally. So you got your leader set, you got your line rigged, and what we do recommend is you get relatively close to the water. So it's not a fishery where you're going to launch a cast off the top of the jetty. You do need to crawl down towards the water, and that's why it's important to check the swell, check the wind, check the tide, make sure that those line up, because you are going to be relatively close to it. And the reasons why you're going to be close to it is because, one, you're going to need some ability to land a fish, but also just to get maybe a roll cast off the water or a short cast and launch it out. Some of these jetties, when you get down close to the water, there's a little bit more space. It might not be as steep as they are at the top, so that'll allow you a little bit more room to cast. So jetties differ. So I fish all the jetties in the Northwest. Depending on the side, the ocean side or the river side or inlet side that you're fishing, changes how you're going to be fishing them. But for the biggest point, there's going to be some sort of current or swell. So you think of it almost as a river. So if you're fishing for rockfish, you're going to cast up current and let it drift down and swing into in front of you and wrap around. And in that swing, that sink tip or sinking integrated sinking line is going to be bringing that fly down into the zone where those rockfish or lingcod will come up and grab that fly. So that's going to be something that you need to be mindful of. And when you're casting, make sure you're casting into that. As the tide slows, then it doesn't become as important. But that slack tide is a pretty short window, so you're going to probably be fishing at least an hour before, an hour afterwards. So those two things are very important. When I do find one, there's generally more than one around, as you guys have seen in some of those Instagram lives. Once you start to get them going, you should progressively catch more. And generally speaking, that is the case. It might not happen that way every single time, but when it does, it's a lot of fun. So you got those shrimp flies and you're landing the fish. This is the last thing I think I have to touch on, is landing a fish. So for rockfish, generally no net. This isn't a fishery where you bring a fish pond net out to the jetty. Don't do it. Leave it at home. For the rockfish, and why we recommend an 8-weight and that strong leader, is when you go to grab the fish, a lot of times you're going to put a big flex in that rod, especially when the swell goes down and the fish goes down. You're going to test that rod. So that is the time where you would theoretically break a smaller rod. You're going to be lifting that fish out of the water or getting that leader close enough to you where you can then grab it and lift them out of the water. Then you can grab them by the lip and throw them back or put them in the cooler. For coho, the thing that you need to do is get a big net. Again, not your trout net. Not even the net that you use that is like a steelhead landing net or anything along those lines. You need a big net with a long handle. You want to be able to reach out into that water, and in doing so, it will keep you safe, keep you out of the rocks, and be able to net that fish safely. So those are the two things when landing a fish to keep in mind. So you're casting out those shrimp flies, and just like that, reading the current. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I didn't touch on. Post fishing, so you fished, be sure to rinse all your gear off. Very important. That salt water will ruin everything you have. Rinse your boots off, give your backpack a spray. Anything that could have gotten salt water on it, just give it a quick rinse. It doesn't need to be anything crazy, just a light rinse. If you're changing flies, if you ever see my other YouTube video, you can slap one of these on the outside of your box, switch flies, and then that should pretty much cover it. If there's any other questions you have, be sure to answer. Oh, and then one thing that people don't typically think of if you're fly fishing off the jetty is retention. So if you're going to keep a fish, if you're going to harvest one of these rockfish, if you're going to harvest one of the coho you catch, be sure to bring a cooler out there, bleed the fish, get it on ice, do the fish justice. It's going to taste way better. You're going to appreciate that a lot more when you get back home. So do be prepared. Don't leave it on the rocks. There's a lot of raccoons. They will steal that fish. And I'm not just saying that. They will steal your fish. So if we could circle back to everything that you've listened to today, be prepared. The jetty's a difficult place to fish. It is challenging. Whether you're on the Washington coast or Oregon coast, whether you come visit us here, be prepared. It is a dangerous place. Be respectful of the ocean. It's a very unforgiving environment to participate in. But in saying that, it can be a ton of fun. And if you haven't done it yet and you're able to do it, we highly recommend it. If there's anything else we can answer, if you'd like to hear us talk about these kinds of things with other fisheries, be sure to let us know. If there's anything I didn't touch on, also be sure to let me know. We do really appreciate you sitting here listening to me babble on about this particular fishery, but this is a really cool one. We've lived here for almost 2 years now, and we fish it a ton. Good luck out there. Let us know how you do, and when you do, come see us. Hit like and subscribe as well while you're at it. Thank you.